Today we have Dr. Leo Yang presenting for us. We're going to shift gears a little bit. I know that the previous parts of this webinar series have been on implants and roto technology. We kind of listened to some of the feedback from doctors, and they mentioned that they were looking for some of the more bread and butter dentistry um, topics to learn from. So today we're going to do that, but we're going to take it up a notch in what I consider to be more of the focaccia bread and the garlic butter of the dentistry. And we're going to go with optimal prep designs for indirect restorations. And without further ado, I'll hand this over to Leo and he can get started.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I'll try to make it today as exciting as possible. I'm actually quite excited about this because, yes, the Roto implant restorative platform is cool and all that stuff. But really, this is really the bread and butter of my practice, and my suggestion is to really work on the bread and butter of your practice because that's really what's going to generate a lot of your income, and that will essentially also drive in the other stuff such as your smile designs, full mouth rehabs to implant restorations like Roto. So the main focus today is indirect restorations, and I probably don't need to or won't be spending too much time on like crown preparation in this case, because I believe a lot of it probably you know how to do already. I'll be focused primarily more on the indirect sort of like class 2 MODs, DOs, inlays, and maybe small onlays. I'll be focused more on that because I believe that most of the doctors are still doing all that in either composites or amalgams and stuff like that also. And I know from my journey was that I want to phase them out just because there's my reasons for it. And I just want to share with you how I did it and how to prep for that. So today, that's my main focus. So disclosure again, if you haven't heard me speak before, yes, I'm getting paid by ARM to speak today, but I just want to share with everybody that the things that I'll be talking to you in regards to my cases, to products I'm using, are things that I do on a regular routine daily basis. And come Monday morning or tomorrow, Friday morning, I'll be still using the same thing. So it doesn't matter, even if owners pay me to do this or talk about this, these are things that I do in my practice on a daily basis. A little bit about me again. I run a full digital practice in Mill Valley, California, just outside of San Francisco. I'm a wet finger dentist also. What does that mean? It just means that a lot of times when people give me products to test out and try out, I'll test it to see if it works in a clinical setting. And basically, you want someone like me to make mistakes for you so that you don't have to make mistakes yourself. Happens to be a CERC trainer also, part of the KOL team of Dentist by Sirona and a Roto Clinical Advisory Board. Now, before I start, this is really interesting here. This is Japan here. And when I was in Japan, you can see that definitely how cars are parked is that everything's automated. And it just blew me away. And I thought it was really cool. And so everything is precision and done with machines and things like that. And so the reason why I say that is that what we're talking about today is that we're going to be talking about indirect restorations, and really majority lab, including Orem nowadays, everything they do majority of times is all custom CAD/CAM mill. And the restorations I'll be talking about in regards to the inlay preparations or small onlays, primarily a lot of the materials that I use is something like a V-Dynamic, and that's something that ARM will be able to offer that to you. Now, of course, you can still use the porcelain stuff like that, but I'm just going to give you another dimension of practice of something that you can incorporate on. So why do I want to do these indirect type of restorations versus my composites, for example? One of the reasons why, a couple of reasons why. One is that because they're a custom mill and precision fit, it's a better restoration than a composite, for sure. I can guarantee you that. Part of it also is just that I'm not very good at composites, because sometimes when I do a composite, I have what I call, contact issues, and I have to go back and add again. Or sometimes it could be avoid stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're very good at these type of restorations and composites, then go for it. But if you want predictable, better restorations, just something for you to consider besides your other materials that you use. Because for me, now the way I prep is very similar to a composite preparation. I can still maintain a very conservative type of preparation, which is good because that's what we want to shoot for also for our patients. For me, I take about the same time or sometimes less time as a composite restoration. And so because of that, I feel like, you know what, it's a good thing. And because that is about the same time or less time, and I do have a different price point for these type of inlay restorations versus composites, it does affect the profitability also. So that's a bonus too. And these are the reasons why I do it. Now, of course, the profitability comes with it. It's not my main focus. All the other reasons why I have here that I'm showing you are the main reasons why I do this versus the composites. So with that said, then, if you go back to the dental school days, you know, I went back to the GV back principles of cavity preparations. If you know, if you remember this, it's funny, as I was looking at this, I thought, wow, still a lot of this applies to me. So what did he say? He said there's 7 principles, which is the outline form, resistance form, retention form, the convenience form, the removal of remaining cavities, finishing enamel walls, and clean cavity preparation. So to start that out, outline form. Okay, what is that? It's based primarily on the location extent of the caries, and the final outline form is not established until the caries dent in, and usually the overlying enamel has been removed. So what does that mean? If you look at picture here, you have a molar here with an MOD composite that's broken on the mesolingual region right around here. And if you look at my preparation is really the blue margin here, okay? And you can see that it's really not that much bigger than the actual preparation of the composite. And part of that has to do with just minimal decay. So why is this important? The reason why this is important is that before me using digital dentistry, a lot of times when I see a problem, I just prep the tooth. I wouldn't think about the outline form. What's important to you is that if you're going to start doing these type of restorations, it's probably a good idea to think in your head what the outline form should be first. And in this case, the outline form, if you think about it, should be approximately maybe the shape of the blue line in the case. Now, I understand that when you're doing full crowns, you probably don't have to think about the outline form too much, but for inlays and onlays, I think you should do that because that's the first thing you should do according to GV Black principle, which I agree with. The next thing is going to be resistance form. What is that? Resistance to both fracture of the tooth and filling material must be built in, so both will be resistant to fracture during function. Now, I think this applies a lot back in the old days when there was a lot of bonding agents and bondable cements. Nowadays, because the strength of bonding agents and bondable cements, I really don't worry about resistant form so much, or I don't think about it too much because a lot of things just don't break. And I can show you later on examples of what that looks like, because if you're not familiar with that, you'll be worried about things breaking. But if you're going to bond things, definitely resistant form doesn't really apply as much nowadays for me. Same thing with retention form, which is the tooth preparation must be shaped in such a way to retain the filling material without weakening the remaining tooth structure. I don't prep in a way to retain the filling anymore because, like I said, again, I don't prep for retention and resistance. I do a little bit, but not majority of the time. And so, because a lot of the times, like I said, everything's held down very tight and very strong by my cements. So if you look at an example here, okay, look at the first and second molar. Look at how my second molar is relatively flat. Now, nowadays, that was how I used to do it many years ago, actually. And back then, I used to do a tabletop flat preps, and I can tell you that this example was probably 10 years ago, and it's still in the mouth. Nowadays, I will have a little bit of a retention form, but in the past, I can tell you that even though when I prep like this, it's still in, it still works. So I know this is very unconventional, but just letting you know how strong cements are nowadays. With that next one, then you have the convenience form, which is what? Allows the adequate observation, accessibility, and ease of operation during the preparation and restoration of the tooth. Only the minimal amount of reduction that will provide the necessary convenience should be done. So what is the example of convenience form? What I do a lot is that after I start or during I start preparation, a lot of times I know that none of you nick adjacent teeth. I do, but whenever maybe you accidentally nick your adjacent tooth to an irregular restoration, such as an amalgam. You know what? It's nice to have a nice convenience form so that you have a nice path. Not just that, but it allows someone like arm to make a restoration that will fit easier. So it is very common for me to do things like this to gain that convenience form. The next thing will be removal of remaining cavities. So after you finish prepping the initial outline, then you will start chasing the decay. So deeper care is not removed by the initial cavity preparation, is now removed at this stage. Care must be exercised as the pulp may be too close in proximity. The next thing after that would be finish enamel walls, removal of an unsupported enamel, make the margin smooth and continues to facilitate the finishing of the restoration. So as you can see on the picture to the left, the crown prep in this case, you can see the surface is really smooth. And typically what I'll use is I'll use a carbide burr to run over my preparation to give that smooth surface so that you're going to have a better bonding surface when you have a smooth surface. The thing after that will be clean up the cavity preparation, rinse away all the debris and dry the cavity preparation so that then you'll be ready for scanning. And I'm just suspecting that a lot of you may be doing digital dentistry, such as digital scanning. If not, then it will be a clean preparation for your impressions then. So with that said then, there's a difference between bonding and luting. Bonding is basically a chemical interaction link between the tooth, restoration, and cement. There's a link there. And luting is basically something, just thinks of something, just put it in there and there's no chemical link. And so a lot of examples I'll be showing you, it's based on bonding techniques. And because of using bond strength, a lot of times you don't need to have so much retention and resistance now. That's why I don't prep for retention and resistance. Nowadays, if you look at the 4 examples here, these are just 4 examples of dual cure resin cements. If you use one of these manufacturers, main manufacturers, they all work. I can tell you that they will stay in strong without worrying about falling out because I've used all of them. Now, yes, some companies may say to you that they have stronger bond strength, but I can tell you that right now, even if it's stronger, it's insignificant, in my opinion, that it's just because it's a little bit stronger. That doesn't mean that the other one will not stay as well. These will all stay well as long as you have good bonding techniques. With that then, also, I'm just going to throw this in there. I think that if you're not doing digital, it's something that you should really consider doing. Part of it is that if you think about it, after you prep the tooth, you can scan the tooth immediately. And depending on the time of when you do the prep, for example, you send to ARM, they could theoretically start working on that case immediately. And think about the turnaround time without shipping in that respect. You can theoretically maybe get a turnaround time within 1 week back again, which is something that is impossible for us to do. Now, there's many scanning systems out there. If you're interested, just reach out to ARM because I know they have the Artero, the Meta, and stuff like that. I'm not too picky about which scanner it is. They probably all work. It's a matter of what you prefer, but definitely consider digital impressioning if that's something that you're not doing right now. Then, in regards to materials now, there's really 3 categories of materials that we will be talking about today. One is porcelain, and typically for me, the porcelain for me in my practice is usually crowns, large onlays, and 3/4 crowns in this case. And what are the type of porcelains? If you go back to the very early days, you started back with the feldspathic porcelain and then Empress porcelain. And I can tell you that I started in those days, and still, if you have good preparations and bonding techniques, it will still work. And even though it's not as strong as your lithium disilicate to zirconia, for example, as long as you have those good principles, it still works because I know that because they're still in my patient's mouth. Then came along lithium disilicate, which is your Emaxes, and that is my go-to material actually for my crowns and onlays and 3/4 crowns. But definitely, if the doctors are more in line with zirconia, you can definitely use that more for crowns. I'm not sure actually, and you have to check with armies that if they're really comfortable with large onlays and three-quarter crowns for zirconia, but definitely I feel very comfortable with Emax in this case. And the last thing is that for my inlays and one-cut onlays, my go-to material is really the hybrid composites. And, and an example of that would be Vita Namic to your GC Ceresmarks, for example. And the hybrid material is basically a combination of composite and porcelain together. You can also have custom milled CAD-CAM mill composite also, but how I see it is that if you're going to use that, my go-to material is going to be the hybrids. So my principles of preparation is that I like to keep things conservative. Even though if there's a thin wall, buckle and lingual wall, you'll see in examples that I will keep them. Something that maybe you might be unfamiliar with, and that if you see things like that, you'll worry about things breaking. But I can tell you that with bonding strength, things just don't break. They just don't break. I like to keep my preps super gingival, so you don't see me going prepping down to the gum line if I don't need to. The only time I'll do that is if it's a replacement of crown down to the gum line or a deep class 2 decay or a buckle decay, then I have to prep down to the gum line or below that. But if not, then I will definitely prep super gingival. Because of that also, then a lot of times I do enamel bonding. So a lot of my preps, like I said, since they're enamel, will be enamel bonding. And you'll notice that with enamel bonding, especially if you have a ring of enamel around the whole tooth, it's super strong. It just doesn't come out. You'll see me also very commonly recontour into proximal contours. And you can see me in the past talks, also webinars that I've talked about, even for the implant restorations. It's very common for me to do to recontour into proximal contours for better fitting and easier path of fit. I like to have smooth surfaces. And the main thing for their inlays now and onlays is that maybe you have to change a little bit. If you're not doing much of this, is that you have to learn to be more divergent in walls. And you just have to learn how to prep that a little bit better to get used to that for an easier path. You don't have to do a lot of divergence. It's just a little bit of divergent wall. So you've noticed that let's just slide right in. So if you go back to the old school, this is actually really old school back in the days of Ivory Card with the Empress preparations, because these are the recommendations back from Empress days. If you look at a couple of things that really still applies now is that if you look at the minimum specs, I think that if you're new to this, if you keep with this principles, you'll probably be safe about not worrying about things breaking or failing on you. So what is the minimum specs, I think? The isthmus width should be approximately 1.5 millimeters. I think that would be a good start. And also a depth of 1.5 also. What I like to do is that I like to also use smooth surfaces versus rough, which means that you just need to go over with a carbide burr, for example, to smooth things out. I don't go so much of flat anymore because I've noticed that if I do flat preparation, if I chase things to make things flat, in some ways I'm over prepping and then sometimes it'll be compromised to a nerve. So a lot of times I'll leave things still irregular, but smooth, okay? So I definitely don't make things flat anymore just because I want to be as conservative as possible. And for sure, internally, you want things rounded versus sharp because you don't want to have any sharp corners for any stress in the material. Now, if you look at it for the crown preparations here now, okay, the crown preparation occlusal reduction nowadays with zirconia, the usual recommendation is usually around 1.00 millimeters in zirconia thickness. And I know that you can probably get away with a little bit less than that. Emax back in the traditional old school days is that when they first started out, they recommend a reduction of 1.5. But I know that nowadays they've changed their recommendation that they're comfortable with 1.0. But again, if you don't want to worry about things failing, you usually, if you have 1.5 in reduction, things just don't break. In regards to margins now, there's butt margins you can do. You can do deep versus light chamfer. I'm more in the camp of a light chamfer. There's no need for deep chamfers anymore or butt margins in regards to materials nowadays. You could still do feather edge. You just got to be careful about it because if you're not familiar with that, things can chip very easily. So if you're not familiar with that or you're not used to that, that's something that maybe you should just not focus on, but maybe more of a light chamfer. They like to keep things conservative. Now, also other things is that if you look at the pictorial, you can see that the preparation follows the anatomical shape of the tooth, the crown preps. For me, I don't do that for porcelains or even for hybrid materials. A lot of times I just go straight across. I don't need to do that because again, I don't need to prep for resistance or retention nowadays. A lot of times I just go flat across. Now with the Emax recommendations, you can see that again for the inlays and onlays, they're talking about 1 millimeter in isthmus and height. But like I said, if you want to be on a safe side, if you're not familiar with this, then stick with the 1.5s. Again, you can see that you're showing 6 degrees of divergence. You can probably get away with less than that. But again, if you have divergent walls, a lot of times things just slide right in. For the partial crown and posterior crowns, a lot of times you can see them, they should show it 1.5. So like I said, 1.5 is probably a good start for you if you're not familiar with this. Axial wall reduction wise, they say 1.0. We really don't need 1.0 for sure nowadays because things don't break that easily. So if you have less than 1.0, then that'll be fine. In regards to preparations of veneers, you can see that 0.3 is super thin. If you want thin veneers with Emax, for example, that's super thin. That's almost as thin as those feldspathic porcelains. So again, if you like thin conservative preps or prepless veneers, you can do as little as 0.3 millimeter to a nice margin would be 0.6. Like I said here in the crown margins here, they show 1.0. You can probably get less than that. And for the tabletop type of restorations, we're talking about 1.0. But again, if you're not familiar with that, if you're scared of things fracturing on you, if you're using Emax, just go with 1.5 and you'll be safe in that respect. Now, an example of endo crowns nowadays, endo crowns, you can see on the left side, you can see a buildup that's been placed on this diagram. A lot of times for me, I don't do buildups anymore, okay? And the reason for me is that I feel like with buildups, you're introducing a layer between the tooth and the restoration. And I just feel like that is just maybe extra layer of possible failures. For me, I like to do what I consider on the diagram on the right side. You can see that it's a direct sort of internal post built in with the restoration. And that would be the same thing if it's not endo tooth, is that I typically don't fill up the irregular surfaces of the prep with a buildup. I don't. I just build up directly on top of that. And the reason why I say that is because you have direct contact, you have more surface area, and I just feel like that's stronger bond strength. Now, in this example, also, you have a functional cusp they recommend to prep in that way. Nowadays, for me, I really don't need that sort of hump right there. I just go straight across, similar to the non-functional cusp. Again, like I said, I don't need that resistant retention form anymore. It's not wrong if you do it. It's fine if you want to do it that way, but I don't do it. I usually just go straight across, and because I have strong cases, strong bond strengths. Now let's look at the cases now. These are actual cases that I do. So at least you can get an idea of what things look like. So this is an example of a prep and restorations on a premolar and a molar. You can definitely see that if you look at the walls, you can see divergent walls. You can see the path. So that's the only main thing that you would do differently, is to be able to prep in a way so that you can see that path looking straight down. So that's important. Other things that you might look at is that if you look at the corner of that molar, mesolingual area, if you're not familiar with these type of preparations, you might ask, well, are you worried about that corner breaking? And I can tell you that right now, if you bond that, which is going to be enamel, by the way, if you bond these restorations, that corner does not break at all. I haven't seen these cases where things will fail, where the walls will break. I'll probably see the restoration break more than actually the walls of that, just because the enamel bond strength is just so strong. So in the others, so that I just want to stress on that. And this is the same thing how it looks like before and after. Pre-op, and then the prep on this side, and then the final restoration. Now in this example, let's just talk about materials now. The premolar, in my opinion, is like, usually I'm very comfortable with the hybrid material. on the molars, I'm actually also very comfortable with hybrid. But if you want something stronger because it's a little bit bigger, you worry about it fracturing on you, then definitely your porcelains or your Emax would definitely be an alternative for you. But I feel very comfortable actually in a case like this that hybrid or Emax will work very well on both materials. As I go to the second case here, this is another example of your typical composite press. This is a very common composite preparation. If you look at the premolar, like an MO or MOBL, for example, you can see that also, again, you can see the path internally. You can see the whole path there. So again, just need to learn how to prep for that. I typically also, if you look at the red line, I typically will also recontour the adjacent T to make a better path or just a little better draw. But another thing that also, if you notice that, is that you might ask, well, okay, if you have this type of design, you notice that the contact points is at the margin. Now, if you ask me how I did cases like this in the past, because I saw like contact points right in the margin, I used to prep and take this whole down, this whole lingual wall down, okay? But I was thinking to myself all this time, because if you were doing this in composite, you wouldn't take the whole wall down. You just do something like this and you just adjust the occlusion. So nowadays, definitely, just because I see this contact point on the margin, I'm not worried about that anymore because, again, I don't see a lot of case failing when I bond something like this. Now, if you're concerned about the contacts on the margin, what you can do is that after you bond it in, you can just adjust this occlusion here so you don't have to worry about contacts on the margin if you want to control that. But like I said, I'm very comfortable, doing restorations like this without prepping the whole lingual wall. And so in this case, for me, the hybrid is probably a nice material for me. Now, why do I say hybrid again? Because in my practice, I do have different price points for composites, porcelains, and hybrid. And so my hybrid is sort of like a different, less fee from my porcelain and higher than my composites. And nowadays, for me, I've almost exclusively phased out all my composites. I really don't do any class 2 composites anymore, or I don't do any more large composites anymore. I really phased out that and do hybrids. And so I just found a way to be able to present and charge also more than my composites. And so basically phase that out. And that's why I just want to tell you how I'm later on, how I incorporate all these type of restorations in my practice. Again, so before and after, you can see this is an example of a hybrid material like your Dynamic or GC Ceresmart. We look at another case also here. I mean, these are something you see a lot. You can see that this is 2 first and second molar. In existing on the first molar, you can see basically in the past, probably I would have done that in a large composite. Nowadays, I'll do that as an inlay. And if you're concerned about any of the walls being too thin and breaking, I'm not concerned about that because, like I said, I don't see any of these things fracturing at all. So this will be sort of more like an inlay in this case for the first molar. If you look at the second molar, you can see sort of like in the past, it will be like a DO composite for me. Nowadays, I would just do a custom milled DO inlay hybrid or porcelain. Now, this is an example where, it will work very well for both composites or at least hybrid or Emax. The only thing you have to be careful about is on the second molar, when you don't have a distal marginal ridge, depending on how the occlusion is, because there's nothing supporting on the distal portion of the tooth, sometimes that marginal ridge can break easier because of the heavy contacts. So either you control the contacts there, or you could opt to use a strong material, which would be the Emax versus the hybrid. But depending on your occlusion control, I think both Emax or hybrid will work very well. Okay, but again, looking at it, it's all sort of divergent wall. You can see the preps internally. It's just something you just have to get used to prepping a little bit more. As I go to the next case, again, this is a very typical composite preps. And this for me would be, again, a nice option for me to do my hybrids in this case. Very straightforward. So instead of doing composite, I just scan to have a custom mill piece done in hybrid. And this is what it looks like before, up here, prep, and then cementation. Okay, again. So with this next case, this would be, for me, an onlay, or 3/4 crown in this case. Now, a lot of you may say, well, how about the lingual wall being thin, or even distal wall or buckle wall being thin? I'm very comfortable, again, in examples like this of retaining those walls just because I don't see things failing or breaking. And again, you have literally a ring of enamel bonding onto that restorations. Things just don't break. Now, again, if you look at it on photo number 2, you can see that the fusion is primarily on the meso aspect of that restoration. So since there's not going to be much contact on the distal portion, then again, that's another reason why you won't see failures of restorations like this. Now, the only thing, like I said, is that, look at the surfaces, you can see that it's irregular. So I would not flatten that and prep that down just because I feel like a lot of times you will compromise the nerve. But what I would do is definitely I would smooth the surfaces. But again, this is a very maybe a non-conventional preparation, but these are examples of what my 3/4 crowns or onlays would look like. And to smooth it out, I would usually use like maybe a composite polishing cup or a point, for example, to run it over the surface to polish things out, to smooth it out. To another restoration here, it could be, and what you do in your practice, like an MOBL composite, for example. But this will be an example how I would either do it in porcelain, Emax, or hybrid. I feel pretty comfortable with that. If you look at picture number 2, you can see the contacts a little bit heavier right around this region here. And so if you're worried about stuff like that, you could theoretically control it once you cement it in and adjust the fusion so you don't put too much stress on that buckle wall. But if you're concerned about that, you can prep that down to be more like a 3/4 crown on online preparation. But like I said, I'm very comfortable leaving this as it is because I just don't see things breaking on a regular basis. And this would be an example of what it looks like before and after. And I will feel very comfortable with my material Emax or hybrid. To another example of amalgam preparation, okay, amalgam removal. And this is something that you see in your practice a lot. You can see that your amalgam is pre-op in picture number 1 to the final is that cemented in number 2. And this is hybrid, by the way. You can see my preparation in picture number 3. This is sort of like really a composite type of preparation. It goes both ways. But instead of me doing a composite, I just basically stand and have a custom hybrid piece made. Now, if you look at in the red ring here, right here, right, even though you can see a step there, I typically would not take that down to smooth it out anymore, just because I don't want to be too aggressive in my preparation. I like to keep things conservative. All I would do is I would still leave that step, but just smooth things out. So I just want to let you know it's not necessary to have to smooth things, to flatten everything up. So it's okay if you leave a step there, just make sure it's smooth internally. To another restorations that you'll be seeing is that in picture number 1, you can definitely see that that it's a broken DOL composite. Okay, so in my custom hybrid piece here, it will be a DOL. Either if you want to build as a 3/4 or onlay, or in this case, a hybrid. You can see that in my preparation number 4, it's really not that much bigger than my number 1, which is great because there probably wasn't a ton of decay. Now, the only thing you have to understand is pay attention to is that things that maybe you don't pay attention to before is really checking the outline funder as well as occlusion. If you look at picture number 3, you can see that there's still heavy contact on the distal marginal ridge. There are reasons why sometimes things break in picture number one is because maybe the occlusion is heavy. So what you might want to manage sometimes is also the occlusion by, if there's a heavy impinging cusp onto this distal marginal ridge, it's okay by the conversation with patient to recontour your opposing teeth so that you don't put too much pressure on it. I'm not saying that it will break your hybrid material, but you'll put less stress on it so that your restorations will last longer also. So I'm just want to bring awareness that sometimes you want to pay attention to occlusion also because you want to control that for things to last longer. Again, I feel very comfortable with the hybrid material for something like this. So like I said earlier, sometimes you might want to consider adjusting your opposing tooth. But again, if you're going to do that, make sure you have that conversation with the patient and make sure they're okay with that because you don't want to do something without them knowing because a lot of times they think you're just shaving their tooth. To another common things that, if you picture number one here, you can see an existing MOD composite with a broken mesolingual region. If you can see my outline form in picture number two, pretty close to the preparation of a composite. Lucky because there wasn't much decay underneath it. So this is, I consider, very conservative prep. I feel very comfortable with a hybrid material for something like this, but if you feel in some ways that it's a little bit too big for hybrid, you can definitely opt for a porcelain. In this case, for me, if I did opt for it, it would be like an E-Max material again. Another example here, you can see that in an existing replacement amalgam, already in picture number one, you can see sort of like the blue perimeter outline. Before I prep, I usually would have an idea of that. This is sort of would be my outline already. So I already have an idea of how I'm going to prep. In picture number two, you can see the distal lingual area. The embracure is not that nice, or at least I couldn't create as ideal embrasure space. If you want to close it up like how you have it on the meso, a lot of times you have to sort of prep more on the lingual distal angle area. Maybe you have to break that more so it can come down here to have a nicer profile. I just want to let you know. But if you're okay with this, which I am, by the way, I'm very comfortable cementing as it is, even though the embrasure space not as ideal. So for me, something like this, since it's a little bit bigger side, I probably would be using E-Max in this case. But again, if you look at picture number four, you can see the divergent wall. So when you have stuff like this, there's usually no problems for that path, or at least for someone like I'm to create that ideal onlay or 3/4 pound for you. To next thing again, very typical things that you see in practice, large amalgam with recurrent decay. This is an example here in picture number two. Again, the thin walls in the buccal and the thin walls in the lingual, this portion right here. I feel very comfortable keeping these walls because I just don't see them breaking. Again, that's only if you bond it. If you don't bond it, then you might want to consider prepping the lingual wall down, sort of like a flatten it out to tabletop. If you're concerned about these preparations breaking on you, then you can definitely prep it down to a super gingival margin tabletop. But like I said earlier, if you're going to bond these restorations, I feel very comfortable leaving these buccal and lingual walls. But this is an example, since it's a little bit larger, I'd probably do it in porcelain, which in this case I did. And my go-to material again is E-Max in this case. Remember I talked about super gingival preps? So in this premolar preparation in picture number 1 and 2, the buccal had to prep down to the gum line. I don't remember exactly why, probably with decay, for example. But on the lingual aspect, you see that if I can always keep it super gingival, I always would do that. And just think about, in this case, when it's super gingival preps, number one, it's much easier for your prep. Number two, it's much easier for you to cement because you don't have to deal with, blood and saliva. Number three is that it's easier for you to clean. Number four, it's also easier for your patients to clean. So I just feel like, you know what, if we can maintain that super gingival preparation, think about other benefits. Now, in picture number 3 and 4 is an example of an endo crown. Okay. A lot of times, remember I told you that I'm not big on buildups and I don't do buildups at all just because I just don't believe in it. You can see that in this crown, I've built in that internal post to the crown. And so in some ways, if you think about it, that's already my resistance retention form. And I feel like, this is going to be strong where with the ring of enamel around bonded to it, which is strong already, and with that post built in, your restoration is not going to come off. And so nowadays, besides buildup, also, I just don't do posts anymore because I feel like a lot of times with posts, there's a lot of risk of root fracturing. So a lot of times I don't do buildups. If I need a buildup, I'll build that in with the crown. Now, for doctors that you're concerned about because you're going to temporize, right? With these sort of super gingival preparations, a lot of times without the internal post, just imagine that it's not endo crown. There could be sort of lack of retention. And so if you want your temporary crown to hold a little bit better because of your super gingival preps, you do need to maybe pay attention to doing a lot of maybe some of your retention groups to hold your temporary in place. So that's just something that you have to do if you want to hold your temporary a little bit better if you're going to do a lot of these super gingival preps. You're not doing it because of bonding. You're doing it just to hold your temporary a little bit better so it doesn't come off while the crown is made for you. So again, example of super gingival preps, tabletop preps. I don't do so much of the tabletop preps anymore as in pictures like this. I probably have a little bit slight more retention now. But like I said, in the past, when I first doing it, I was doing a lot of this and it still works though. But I have changed my mind where I do a little bit more retention. And I feel like with that, then it does hold a little bit better. But just showing you what I used to do and it still works though. But again, like I said, I will still continue to do a lot of these gingival preps. You can see on the lingual aspect, way above the gum line, and then on the lingual aspect here, on the buccal aspect, you can see that same thing. Just imagine it's so easy to scan and so easy to manage. And internally, if you look internally, it's irregular. And by keeping things irregular, if you think about it, that's already going to bring a lot of retention for you. And because you have these extra surface area that will bond onto the restoration. So, with the bond strength being so strong and a lot of surface areas and enamel bonding, I just don't see things failing or coming off that easily. If you start talking about anterior preparations or crown preparations now, because I talked about a lot about inlays and non-lays. For crown preparations for anteriors, or if you're thinking of just a little bit of tips here, if you think about enclosing diastema, which this was what case that was, we had to do also. A lot of times you have to pay attention by prepping subgingivally around this area and bringing down to the lingual, more like a crown preparation. So I need to start again. You have to prep subgingival and bring it to the lingual for the lab to close it for you. So if you want to close diastema, make sure you prep subgingivally around the mesial aspect of that and bring it round to the lingual for them to be able to close up diastemas for you. If you look at premolars here, a lot of times I will still keep the lingual wall here. I have to prep the occlusal there. Part of that probably is because it was an occlusion, so I will still leave the lingual wall like this, if you think about it. And they just don't break because, again, you have the ring of enamel around the premolar. So again, if you look at crown preparations here with root canals, I will have that root canal built in part of the crown. Instead of doing a post, I will have a short post built in with a crown for retention. And I just don't see things failing at all. I don't even see less root fractures because there's no post in turn. To veneer preps, if you look at my veneer preps, a lot of times, depending on how the occlusion is, if you look at the premolar regions, a lot of times I will have a lip around the whole tooth. And if you think about that, you have a really a ring of enamel here to bond to a tooth, and it's just stay strong. Now, of course, if your edge of it is going to be in heavy occlusion, a person's flexor or clencher, a lot of times I'll maybe prep a little bit differently to gain a little bit more retention. But a lot of times, if the occlusion is good, a lot of times I will prep something similar to this. Again, this is a very typical case with veneer preps here. If the occlusion is good, these are my typical veneer preps. Notice that I have a little blue or black line here. The reason why I have black line there is a lot of times with my photography and scan, a lot of times my lab technician can see the midline. That's a midline marking for them. So they can see it so that they can correct the midline, then they exactly know where the midline of the teeth is in relationship to the face. So a lot of times I will have a blue or black marking on the gums when I scan to show them where the midline is going to be. So let's talk about an actual case now, start to finish. This is a premolar composite replacement. The first thing I do is what? Start to finish. In this case, I also had to prep the buccal wall. I don't remember why, probably because of decay, but already imagining before I prep, I think about the outline form. What is my outline form? My outline form is probably something like this. So I already know that this is going to be something I'm going to be prepping on. I'm going to take the buccal wall down. So because of that, what is my first step after my outline form? I'm going to start prepping. What I'll do is I'll take down the buccal wall with my reduction burst. It just so happens that I use a Meisinger here. You can see the different depths in this case. I use a 2.0 reduction burr. I would sort of go across on the buccal to do my channel preps. That's my first step. My next step would be then using something like a donut to connect those channels to create a prep like this. Now you can see decay still on the occlusal table or under my DO composite, right? So I've already created my outline form already. Now with that reduction burr and donut preparation, that is less than 1 minute, I can tell you right now. Then after that, I will start removing decay with my black diamond burr, my super coarse burr, and I'll start chasing that and finish sort of my preparation after that. Then what I'll do is now I'll smooth the surfaces, okay, with a carbide burr. So then I've done my final preparation. Then after that, then I will recontour, which is your convenience form again, okay? I will contour adjacent teeth to give me that surface, the clean surface, and also a clean path. Then internally, I'll be smoothing the surface. This area, I'll smooth the surface with something like a composite cup or a point in this case, to smooth the internal surface of the prep. And if there's a lot of bleeding involved, what I like to do is I like to use a retraction paste, a 3M retraction paste, which is like a hemostatic agent. The one thing I do like about the retraction paste is that it doesn't irritate the gums. If you let it sit for 5 minutes, it'll dry out the composite and also retract. You notice that with a cord, sometimes when you pack the cord too much, it will cause bleeding. I don't like hemostatic agent nowadays just because, you know, sometimes to make a mess. And I don't use lasers as much because sometimes it can cause bleeding also. So I do like to use a hemostatic agent such as a retraction paste. That's my go-to material. And after everything's clean, then it's ready for scanning. Notice that the tissue here, it's all clean. And think about that. You can easily bond onto this without any issues. So then once it comes back from RM, the restorations, the first thing I do, okay, is some of the steps I do optional that I've added on top of my bonding procedure is that I do pumice after the temporary is off. Okay, this is an optional step, not part of your manufacturer's recommendations. And the reason why I do this is that these are things I've been doing a long time. And since things don't fail and the patients don't have sensitivity or endo issues, these are just things I've just incorporated that I keep on doing. So I pumice the tooth first. Next thing I do is typically then I will do a chlorhexidine scrub to do an antibacterial rinse. Again, optional. After that, then I will do enamel selective etching. You can see a lot of manufacturers' recommendations that you don't have to do this, but I still do that because I like to have a stronger enamel bond. Then what I'll do is then either plumber's tape to put adjacent teeth so that cement doesn't get stuck on it, or you can use a blue set material that you paint on the interproximal of that restoration. It's a gel format and it's to prevent cement from sticking. Remember the times that you've used to use those cements and hard time cleaning interproximally? Just two suggestions would be something that will save you a lot of time. So then where do you get the plumber's tape? You can get it from your Home Depot, more savings, or I think Canadian Tire in this case. So that's where you can get your plumber's tape, relatively inexpensive, much cheaper than blue set if you want. But again, very easy. Then after that, then the first thing I do is then I will do a microprime desensitizer. Microprime is very similar to your Gluma. And part of that is that, like I said, it's optional. It's been something I've been doing a lot. And I just don't have cases that patients have endo issues, just none of that. And so I really truly feel like this does make a difference. And Gordon Christensen did say that with Gluma, they've tested out that sometimes they can create the increase in bond strength also. The next thing after that is that after the Gluma or microprime, then I will use your bonding agent from your manufacturer's kit, in this case, whatever they have. I would put the bonding agent on. And for inlay and onlays, I typically would put cement inside the tooth, okay? Just imagine if you put cement on your restorations, a lot of times handling with fingers, a lot of times it would just fall on the ground. How do I know that? It happened to me. So for inlay and onlays, typically I put cement inside the tooth. If it's a crown, I'll put the cement on the crown. Then after that, then I will place the restoration on the tooth. And especially if your assistant is going to be passing on to you, it's incredibly important for them to make sure that the orientation that they give you, it's going to be the same orientation that you put in the mouth. Don't try to sort of spin it around and move in a way that it goes to the mouth. Just make sure they give you the orientation when you put it in the mouth, because you want to minimize moving around. And because if you start doing that, sometimes you just drop the restoration. Just makes it even more hard to do. After that, then I start cleaning off excess cement at this point. Then what I'll do is I'll tack cure buccal and lingual for around 2 seconds. Okay. Then I'll start cleaning up with your pigtail and your interproximal, and I floss it also just to make sure. Then the next step I typically do in my practice is that I'll use a OxyGuard from Panavia, or also if you don't want to buy it from Panavia, just use glycerin, which will work. And that is to cure the oxygen inhibiting layer. And this is the layer that sometimes when you cure it, you don't have that staining around the margin over time. That will prevent that from happening. So either OxyGuard from Panavia or glycerin in this case. And after that, then I'll clean up the cement again. And if you clean up a lot of cement at the beginning, you don't have to worry. You don't see a lot of this cement to clean up. Again, I clean up with the pigtail and your interproximal carvers. Then after that, you do a final cure buccal and lingual for 10 seconds each, depending on what curing light you use. Final cure, okay? And then you have your restorations. Again, with my super gingival preps, you can see the margin vaguely right here. There's techniques that you can hide the margin. With my super gingival preps, I can really show you that you can hide the margins also. And there's techniques for that. And so that's the reason why I do super gingival preps also, because I can really hide the margin quite well. Now, if the patient's super picky, then maybe you won't do that. You might want to prep it down to the gum line. But a lot of times, if the patient's not picky, a lot of times I will do a super gingival preps. So timing wise, I'm almost there. So my takeaway, what's my takeaway? I have to put that picture in from the roto scannable healing abutment, just because I'm a big fan of that. And if you've heard me speak previously, that's something I use a lot for roto stuff. But anyways, you know what? You just got to do it. If that's something that you want to phase your composite out, you just got to do it. And my recommendation is that, you know what, do it with the easy first cases first. What is the easy case? Patients that you like, patients you have good relationships with. Maybe do with the premolar first. Don't do with the second molars. Don't do that because you want to gain confidence with regards to how you prep. Start with that. Another thing is that go digital. I can tell you that with the digital scanning, it's going to make your life much easier. Things you have to learn to prep also is that maybe you have to start prepping divergent also if you're going to do a lot of these inlay preps. Learn your preps a little bit more. As you start your preps, you notice that with digital scanning, it's a humbling effect. I thought before I was doing digital, I thought I was a good prepper, but once I started scanning and looking at my preps, I was amazed of how I can improve. You'll notice that with your preparations, when you look at your stuff on the digital scanner and blow it up, you can definitely see the flaws. And I guarantee you that by doing digital also, you become a better dentist and better prepper. Things that you pay attention also is that interproximally, pay attention to that because a lot of times by doing a lot of the interproximal reduction or at least interproximal smoothing, you notice that your restorations will fit easier and better. So these are my takeaways. And thank again for Arm Group for putting this together. This leads me now to my next thing. So this is just a little flavor of what inlays and onlays are. And so now you have an idea how to do it. The question now would be, how do you sell it or how do you talk to patients? Because I've done that. I've learned that. I just figure out ways of how to maybe present to patients and how to get patients to accept. So my next seminar in September 19th, I invite you to that, is basically now you understand the concept of preparations. The question now is, how do you present these cases? And I've found ways that I can share with you my experiences of how to present to patients, simple techniques, nothing fancy. So of how to talk to patients so that they will have a higher chance of accepting these cases. So I invite you in September 19th, this year, next month, at 4 p.m. I'll be showing you just my techniques of doing it. With that said, also, if you're still interested in doing roto implant restorations, I highly urge you, if you don't have the step-by-step manual, definitely reach out to Daniel and Aurum to get that PDF format for start to finish of how to do roto. And with that said, then also, it's really a collaboration between Aurum and SS doctors. SS doctors, if we give them good stuff, such as good preparation, clean scans and stuff like that, they'll be able to give you better restorations. And as you give you better restorations, then things are going to be successful and things just don't break. So it's a collaboration, hand-in-hand collaboration between us and the lab, Aurum lab partners. With that said, then, again, if you need to reach out to me, please send me an email, leoyandds@gmail.com. If I don't get back to you, it's not because I'm ignoring you, just email me again. But definitely, if you have any lab solutions, please reach out to Daniel. His email is up there at danielm@aurumgroup.com. Thank you for your time today. I hope they made it interesting. I think I'm just a little bit beyond time, and I will bring it back to Dan.
All right. Thank you very much, Leo. Great course on not just the design, but also how, why, and what materials to use. So I think you did a great job explaining all of that. And right off the bat, we've got a question for you. It is, what is the difference in your fees for Class 2 direct composite versus indirect? Percentage of the difference if you don't want to talk dollars? And does insurance plans often cover the indirect?
So I'm going to try to make it as simple. So I'm going to dance around the question. I'm going to try to give you a short answer to that. And I will actually go in detail actually in the September 19th one, because I thought about that. Because first of all, you have to learn how to prep first. The next thing you have to do is to know how to present to patients. So to answer your question, I'm speaking for American fees now, okay? Because you can use the same parallel to your Canadian fees. So my composite fees, for example, is maybe like an MOD, for example, it's around maybe $400 approximately American, okay? But what I've done also is then I've found a way to also charge my hybrid, which is approximately $700 to $800 in fees. And then, of course, my fees for my EMAX is a little bit higher than that. And so my hybrid fee is around $800 and my composite is 400, right? And I'm very transparent with my patients that I'm willing to talk dollars with them. And I would still tell them that insurance covers it. My typical answer to them is that I would say, hey, Ken, I just want to let you know that, yeah, insurance does cover the hybrid and the composite. Just expect your copay to be a little bit higher with the hybrid versus the composite. Now, I typically don't talk about pricing first. I typically tell them the pros and cons about the differences between the hybrid versus the composite because they see the value of it. So you always have to talk about the value first, then talk about the money later on. Because once they see the value, then they're more likely to say yes to my $800 versus $400. So, like I said, I'll probably go in detail into that in my September 19th, but that's basically sort of like a short answer to your question.
All right, perfect. Are there any other questions while we're just wrapping up at all? Don't see any coming in at the moment, so what I might do is share my screen and give everyone the ability to see the QR codes. So here is the first one here. So this one will give you the chance to fill out a quick survey. You'll get an email from us, and Tanya will send you the Q or the CE points. So I'll leave that up for a moment. And now we'll go to the Orem Academy events page. So on here, you'll be able to sign up for future webinars, as well as see any other events or programs that we are putting out there. The Orem Academy is always striving to give the best possible education for our doctors. And if you have any specific interest, feel free to give us a call as well or an email, and we'll be happy to look into putting on a course of that as well.
I appreciate everyone. Thank everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Leo, again for an excellent seminar. And I hope to see everyone back here for our next round.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.